All right. The lecture on Chapter 10, Interest Groups. These 6-week semesters go fast. So your text starts out with an expose on the federal soda tax bill. This proposed policy, the government wanted to use a tax on soda to modify behavior and also to fund the government. So this is what is known as a sin tax. It's an excise tax, so that's an I right in there. The sin tax is just what the name suggests, a behavior that the government society deems inappropriate, is harmful to some degree, and so they want to discourage it by placing a tax on it. So the proposal would have added a 1 cent tax for each ounce of a soft drink. And you think about it, a soft drink's 12 ounces. This is a pretty hefty tax. You got 6 sodas in a 6-pack. There's 72 cents on a 6-pack. So at any rate, that's what was being proposed. That's why they were proposing it, trying to modify behavior. All this sugar, not good for individuals, and so we understand the intent of the policy to modify that behavior, and there again, the government is paying a lot of people's health care or subsidizing it in some way, and so if they can make people healthier, that would limit their costs there. So there's another reason as to why they would want to reduce the risk of those things related to the consumption of soft drinks. So, some reasons against. The soda industry lobbied against the bill because they argued it would be a loss of billions of dollars to the soda company and consequently a loss of jobs because people are going to have to drink fewer sodas. The additional cost is going to cut into consumption. Coca-Cola and Pepsi spent $18.9 million lobbying against this proposal. A coalition was formed as the Americans Against Food Taxes, and with all this lobbying, Congress quickly dropped the proposal. Now, the association that was doing the lobbying was the American Beverage Association. Really pretty an interesting symbol. Ties in obviously with the flag and trying to suggest that, hey, we are America too, and so our rights should be protected. So the American Beverage Association is an interest group. So what is an interest group? An interest group is an organization of people with shared policy goals who enter the policy process and seek to achieve those goals. Seems reasonable, and on so many levels, it seems reasonable. We're going to get more into that idea of reasonableness a little later on. Why not? Why not let individuals form organizations and try to pursue the policies that they see as beneficial? So you'll recall that when we talked about political parties, I had this same exact slide. I just copied it from the political party's PowerPoint. Just want to remind you of this. So political parties seek to elect candidates to public office by supplying them with a label by which they are known to the electorate, and then they will work to create together to create and implement policy. So they are policy generalists. On the other hand, interest group is any organization that seeks to influence public policy. They are policy specialists. So they don't want to control the government like a political party does. They want to influence policy behavior consistent with the desires of the group that they represent or who they are. That's what an interest group does. So both try to influence the government. In a sense, one over here on this side becomes the government. Here, they're just trying to influence the government on a specific policy or a smaller set of policies. So policy specialists. The individuals that these interest groups send to not necessarily put pressure, that's the wrong word, but to speak to the government are lobbyists. They represent the interest group before the government. When you get a group of interest groups that join together to achieve some common interest, like you had here with the American Beverage Association, then you get an association. And the association is an interest group, but it's just a bunch of different organizations that are doing that. So going back to our original example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi were part of that association. Other soft drink companies were as well. All right. Now, interest groups have been expanding rapidly for the last 50 years. In 1959, there were 6,000 interest groups. By 2018, there were 24,000 interest groups. I read one text in which the claim was there were today over 200,000 interest groups. I can't remember if there's a test question on this. If there is, go with this answer that 24,000 interest groups. All right. There are so many interest groups today that even the lobbyists themselves, so if we go back here, these guys, they have an association that represents them. It's the Association of Government Relations Professionals, i.e. lobbyists. So why the increase? Why the vast increase in the number of interest groups? The development of computer technology has just made it so much easier to organize and to track individuals with similar interests. Also to communicate. It used to be that in order to communicate with all these different people, you had to go through mailing or phone calls. That was very, very expensive. Now today, with putting their information in a database and a few clicks of the mouse, you can send out a mass electronic mailing to solicit monies, and also just and the communication goes the other way as well. Members can communicate what they want to legislatures and to the interest group or association itself through that same process, which has made it expand much more rapidly because it's just so much easier today than it used to be. So there are three views of interest groups. We'll look at each of them: pluralism, elitism, and hyperpluralism. So here we start out. So pluralism, now don't get confused with this distinction between pluralism and hyperpluralism. So pluralism is similar to hyperpluralism. It's hyperpluralism, just as the name suggests it's pluralism just run amok, just gone too far, but we'll get there. So pluralism is a theory rests on the idea that there are many centers of power in the American political system. So there's not just one center of power. There's not just a parliament, so to speak. There's not just a Congress. There's a legislature in all 50 states. There's governors. There's a president. There's city offices, the mayor, the city council, which is essentially a legislature for the city. There's county governments. So there's many centers of power that individuals can go to try and push for their demands. The extensive organization of competing groups is evidence that influence is widely dispersed. So you've got all these groups. If these groups couldn't, at least some of the times, if not often, achieve their desired ends or close to that, they wouldn't exist, is the idea, is part of the idea behind pluralism. But pluralism also argues, and this is really fundamental, that when you have these competing groups, so if you've got a group over here and you've got a group over here, and they're opposed to each other, that struggle that emerges between those two, that struggle that emerges, and the resulting legislation or policy that comes out of that struggle will be a rough approximation of the public interest. That's a really unique and interesting perspective. You got two groups fighting against each other, or potentially more, and they're going to press here and they're going to press here, and where they can find that middle ground is going to be that rough approximation of the public interest. Okay, so here's some key fundamental aspects of pluralism. Groups, meaning these interest groups, provide a key link between people and the government. So in a democracy, how is it that we influence the government? Well, we influence the government by voting, but we only vote every so often. How do we influence the government in the meantime? One of the ways is through this process and the struggle of interest groups. They are that link between the people and the government when there is not an election. Okay, also key within pluralism is groups compete, as we suggested right down here. No one group is likely to dominate. Nobody's going to dominate all the time. You're going to have some groups that are stronger, some groups that are weaker, and no one's going to be the king of the hill all the time. It's just not going to happen. There's going to be this struggle even when there is a very powerful group. Also fundamental to pluralism is interest groups usually play by the rules of the game. They're not out to control the government by some subterfuge or trickery. They play by the rules of the game. They want to be around for the future. They don't want to be criminalized as far as any one particular interest group saying that they violated the law and therefore being disbanded or going to jail, etc. Groups that are weak in one resource can use another. These are fundamental aspects of pluralism. All right, so critics claim that power is concentrated in the hands of the few. So critics of pluralism claim that the concentration of power is in the hands of the few. Those critics come from the elite school. So going back here, so individuals who reject this idea that no one group is likely to dominate, they're coming from the elite view, and argue that basically power is in the hands of the few. Okay, so let's take a look at the elite view. Elitist. Well, let me back up. So pluralists are impressed with the vast number of organized interest groups. Elites, on the other hand, are impressed with how insignificant most of those groups are. So what does elitism hold? They say that real power is held by the relatively few people, key groups, institutions, and corporations. So it's the vast, it's not the vast that make it happen, all these vast interest groups. It's the dominant ones. So going back to our slides at the beginning, the elites would say, well, the reason this was successful at being dropped is because Coca-Cola and Pepsi got involved, and they spent $18.9 million, which was the bulk of the, like 90%, as I recall, of the money that was spent. So that is what elites say, all right? Many Americans agree with that view of elitism. In 2016, 79% of respondents felt that the government was run by a few big interests looking out for themselves. And only 21% thought policy was beneficial for all. So you can see that Americans, at least when they're asked about who dominates things, see this elite kind of view as consistent with what they think actually happens. All right, so some other components here. The fact that there are numerous groups proves nothing, because these groups are unequal in power. Most of the power, the tremendous power, is held by large corporations. There is also power that is fortified by interlocking directories. For example, 1/3 of corporate boards are occupied by the people who hold more than one such position. So you've got a major corporation, and you have lots of major corporations in the United States, and 1/3 of all those people are on more than one of those boards. So that gives them even more power because they can say, for example, if their company is thinking about doing something, they can say, well, this would be a good idea, or it wouldn't be a good idea because this is what's going to be happening with Microsoft or whatever company they're on. And so that just gives them extraordinary power, that inside knowledge. Other groups may win minor policy battles, meaning these less important interest groups. But corporate elites prevail when it really comes to the big decisions. That's what the elites say. Okay? Now we get to hyperpluralism. Hyperpluralism, so remember, we're going back here. This is the first one, and we said that hyperpluralism is going to argue that pluralism has run amok. All right? So hyperpluralism basically says that they're critical of pluralism because they say it's out of control. That government is excessively deferential, meaning they'll do whatever interest groups want. And it treats virtually all groups' demands as if they are legitimate and advance them all. It doesn't look and say, okay, is this really a good idea? Should we be doing this in society? They just say, oh, the interest group wants this, let's move for it. So the result of those policies is that interest groups increase because they know what they oftentimes, or most of the time, they can get what they want, and then would get conflicting regulations expand, and programs multiply, and the budget skyrockets, which is really where we are today. Now, interest group liberalism has led to what political scientists called iron triangles. This is really a network of sub-governments. So today we hear a lot about the deep state. Back in the 70s, 80s, there was a lot more about iron triangles. And you could really argue that iron triangles are part of the deep state. So what is an iron triangle? So it's composed of key interest group leaders, government agency, meaning a bureaucracy, and members of Congress of a congressional committee or a subcommittee. All right? So the main goal of each element of this iron triangle is to protect its own interests. So let me go to a bigger slide with this. So an interest group will offer Congress person electoral support. They'll help pay for the cost of the campaign. They'll make donations. They'll talk good about them. They'll try and suggest to their members that, hey, this individual would be a good person to vote for. And then Congress, in turn, will provide friendly legislation and oversight over the interest group. The bureaucracy, congressional, same idea. The interest group will try and get congressional support by lobbying Congress for the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy are those government agencies under the executive, under the president, who help the president administer the law. They are certainly part of the deep state. Okay, and what do they give to interest groups in return? Low regulation and special favors. So that's, you can see here how this iron triangle would create a situation where interest groups are getting what they want because they're supporting members of Congress. Yeah, pretty crazy what's happened relative to that. Okay, so what are the conclusions of hyperpluralism? They conclude that interests have become too powerful in the political process as government attempts to appease every conceivable interest. They're just going to get what they want. So you see this little cartoon over here. This kid comes up to him and basically, from the cartoon, you can tell what he's asking. He says, "No, I'm not a NASCAR driver. I'm a U.S. senator," because the guy is supporting every cause out there. So there you have it. Let me get rid of this. Sorry, let's pause it. Okay, I'm back. Interest group liberalism is aggravated by these iron triangles, and that interest group liberalism is that we just tend to give interest groups what they want. And finally, trying to appease every group often results in contradictory and confusing policies. So if you give one group what they want and you've got another group that is diametrically opposed to the other group and they both get what they want, there's going to be conflicting policy. Just how it is. All right, so what are the factors that make some groups more successful than others? So the size of an interest group is going to be helpful. The more members there are, the more resources they're going to have. Individuals contributing to the interest group itself, the intensity of the lobbying that they can do, the letter writing, the emailing, etc. Ironically, though, smaller groups are more likely to achieve their goals. So now, smaller up to a point. Obviously, you can't have an interest group of 3 people and expect that you're going to get what you want. But smaller groups are going to have, their demands are not going to be as great. They're also these smaller groups are easier to organize. So you have a number of what political scientists refer to with interest groups, a number of issues. So the potential group are all the people who could be members of an interest group because they share a common interest group. And then you have the actual group, those who actually join. So if you have a large interest with potential members, but you don't get them joining, the actual group may be less powerful than it could be because they're not joining. And so when a collective good is at stake, individuals who don't join the group still receive the benefit of an interest group if the interest group is able to achieve that goal. So, for instance, if you're a big gun advocate and you don't join the NRA, the National Rifle Association, but the National Rifle Association is successful in protecting your right to own a gun, you still get that right despite the fact that you didn't join and pay the dues, the fee, the annual fee to join. So this idea that individuals who will get the benefit even if they don't join is called the free rider problem. The free rider problem. So interest groups are obviously aware of this, and so they take steps to mitigate the effects of the free rider problem. All right, so the larger the potential group, the more serious this free rider problem is going to be. So if you look at gun owners, there could be a very large free rider problem. The smaller the potential group, the easier it is to overcome the problem, because if individuals don't join, if they don't participate, if they don't pay their dues, if they don't try and do those things which will bring about their goals, the means to accomplish goals just won't be there, and there won't be any policy that would be beneficial that they want. And so to overcome this free rider problem, what interest groups try to do is they try to offer selective benefits only to members. And there are a number of benefits that they try to offer to convince individuals to join the interest group. So these are known, there's certain types: material incentives, solidarity incentives, and purpose incentives. So my brother, a number of years ago, it was actually in 2008, he's a big gun advocate. and he wanted me. I'm part of the free rider problem, and he wanted me. And I have guns. I don't have near as many as him, but he wanted me to support the cause. And so for Christmas in 2008, he bought me a membership to the NRA. And I'm thinking, yeah, gee, thanks a lot, Jim. That's, very helpful. What good does it do me? Well, of course, the good that it does me is to make sure that guns remain legal. But what good does it do me in the immediate? And so the NRA knows this. And so what you get with your membership is you get a magazine that comes to you monthly. And the magazine, and there's actually 6 you can choose from. It's called America's First Freedom. And this was one of the covers of that magazine in 2008. Or this probably would have been 2009 because I joined in 2008. So, and this was the election year between when Hillary and Obama were going for the Democratic nomination for president. And I just found this cover just hilarious and true. And it's like, just as it says, banned if you do, banned if you don't. So whichever one of these people you vote for, they're going to be looking to limit your right to own a firearm. Furthermore, within this magazine, there was something known as Armed Citizen. And I really liked this Armed Citizen, so much so that I actually considered joining the NRA when my membership expired a year later. I actually considered joining the NRA because I enjoy getting these Armed Citizens, which were part of that magazine. So check this out. So it would tell you little stories. There would be about 6 of these in every issue. The 17-year-old offender must have thought Lita Smith, an 85-year-old great-grandmother from southwestern Pennsylvania, would be easy prey. But Smith had the one tool that allows the weak to defend themselves against the strong, a firearm. According to police, when Smith heard the suspect forcibly enter the home, she went straight for her .22 caliber revolver and trained it on him. I said, "What are you doing in my house?" Smith recalled. He just kept saying he didn't do it. Showing great bravery, Smith held the suspect at gunpoint, forcing him to dial 911 and remain in a spread eagle position on the floor until police arrived. Okay, so I just found these so interesting that I thought about joining again. I didn't. But you see what they're trying to do with this magazine. It is a material incentive. You get something for joining. They're trying to overcome that free rider problem. All right. The AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, has a membership of 38 million Americans. Just incredible. 38 million Americans. I have here in the slide that is 50 years of age and older. That might be wrong. It might be 60, but at any rate, and what they do, what the AARP does, is they offer material incentives on travel and insurance discounts. So if you join the AARP, it's going to be cheaper for you to do some of the things that you already do. And so this is how they have built up their membership. Incredible. That's over 10% of the United States population involved in one interest group. No wonder Congress is very attentive to what older Americans want. First of all, they also vote. And there's that organized interest, which helps to organize them. They can put some pressure on Congress to do that. All right. The intensity and success of an interest group. Let me just go back here for a second. So I looks like I forgot to put in a slide, but I can just go over this real quick. So the other ways that interest groups try to overcome this free rider problem is solidarity incentives. So in other words, some people join interest groups because they want to be part of a cause. And And this is a great way to get people to band together. Others join because they want to achieve the purpose, the stated purpose of the interest group. So those are ways that the interest groups try to get people to join. Okay, so the intensity and success of an interest group. Large groups can be mobilized when people have strong feelings about an issue. That just makes sense. You look and see what's happening right now at all these universities with the Hamas Israel thing, and there are people who are mobilizing who have those strong feelings. Politicians are just more likely to listen if people care deeply about an issue. If you're just casually, and they're not interested. If you feel deeply, there's some motivation for them to move. So intense lobbying against a proposal is a powerful predictor of whether the proposal will become law. So again, going back to the soda tax, intense lobbying against it, and boom, Congress pulled it. It didn't become law. Groups opposed to a policy change are more likely to feel intensely about their position than groups calling for change. So if you've got a policy that is already in place, and there's a proposal to change that, those individuals who are benefiting from that policy are just much more likely to come out and show that support than those who are calling for change. So because of that, interest groups and their activities often serve to preserve the status quo, not to change it, as again we saw with soda tax. All right, the rise of single interest groups. Single interest groups are groups which have a narrow interest. They have such a narrow interest because there are strong emotions and they get involved, i.e. the easiest one that comes to mind for me is the National Rifle Association. The problem, the challenge with single interest groups or single focus interest groups, they're just not likely to compromise. You can't say, okay, guns only every other weekend. You can only buy guns on Saturday. The guns are still out there. So they relentlessly pursue their goals because their goals are so narrow. So you've got anti-war groups, opponents of nuclear weapons, gun control, and abortion rights are some of these single-issue interest groups that have these dynamics that go on. So how do interest groups try to shape policy? There's 4 basic strategies. They lobby, they electioneer, they litigate, and they appeal to the public. So lobbying. In the early days of Washington, D.C., men, and they were men in those days, they stayed in hotels while they were in Washington, D.C., and while Congress was in session. And so since there were no offices, the only way to make sure you got in touch with a congressperson was to go to their hotel and wait in the lobby. And so these individuals that went to talk to a congressperson from an interest group became known as lobbyists because they spent so much time waiting in lobbies. And so with lobbyists, you're just doing that. You're talking to a congressperson, an elected official, trying to get representation for your group and persuade that elected official to support a particular policy. Now, there is the Lobbying Disclosure Act. There was felt like, hey, if somebody's being lobbied, if a congressperson is being lobbied or some government official is being lobbied, they ought to know they're being lobbied. These people, so the Congress passed the Lobbying Disclosure Act, which lobbyists must register with the Secretary of the U.S. Senate. They've got, as a lobbyist, they have to file a report regarding each client, detailing how much they were paid by them for their services. In other words, who's hiring them to go and lobby. And so there are over 20,000 disclosures annually relative to the Lobbying Disclosure Act. All right, where is it that a lot of these big, a lot of the big lobbying goes on? Look at pharmaceuticals, by far the most. No wonder drugs are so expensive. Now, they cost a lot to develop, but you can see here they have certainly been protected. So the blue is 2017, the red 2016. All right. Other interesting ones, automotive, even telephone. What the heck? Why does telephone need lobbying? But, well, we don't want to raise the cost of it too much. That'll hurt their business. And so you just see all these things, a lot of lobbying going on. And this is, of course, in the millions. This is how much they're spending. All right, almost done. Lobbyists aid Congress as well as lobbyists, lobby it. So a bill that comes before Congress can be 1,000 pages. Some of them are more. Many of them are far less. But there's no way for a member of Congress and for all the members of Congress to know everything about a piece of legislation that they're voting on. That is, lobbyists then become an important source of information, because lobbyists will come into Congress people and say, hey, look, this is a good bill because this is what it does. Or somebody who's against say, no, this is not good. Look at this section of the bill. This is going to have negative repercussions because of this. So it points out to lobbyists, it points out to the Congress people information that they wouldn't have time to find on their own because there's just too much. There's 6,000 pieces of legislation that come before Congress in any one congressional session. That's 3,000 pieces of legislation every year, since Congress is 2 years. Now, furthermore, in addition to that, lobbyists can aid politicians with their political strategies for getting legislation through Congress. These lobbyists, many of them are former members of Congress themselves. They know how the system works. They have contacts, and they can get the ducks in a row, so to speak, to make things happen. Obviously, it doesn't always work, but this can happen. They can help formulate campaign strategies and get a group membership behind a politician's reelection campaign. This is what we talked about there with iron triangles. And the interest groups or lobbyists are sources of ideas and innovation themselves, which then members of Congress can go and attempt to pass legislation and look like they're doing something for their district, etc. Electioneering. Lobbying works best with those who are already on the side of the group's interests. Getting supportive legislatures into office and keeping them there is a key strategy of interest groups. This is known as electioneering. So you want to get somebody in office who supports your cause, and then you want to keep them there. And so electioneering is this lobbyist financial aid to candidates by getting the group members to support them with political donations, and then also with PAC actions or political action committees. So a political action committee is this idea of a separate group that gets behind a candidate, raises dollars for them, and then distributes the campaign contributions to the political candidate. So in the 2015-2016 election cycle, the FEC reported there were 5,944 PACs, and they raised $2.24 billion. So a lot of electioneering going on right there. There are PACs that are formed by business, associations, interest groups, union, or other interests will donate to a candidate who they will believe will support the interest group. So Donald Trump once said, he says, I gave to Democrats and to Republicans because he wanted an ear in office. And so PACs kind of do the same things. They'll donate to unions. Some will donate to candidates. But they will donate to those who they believe will support their cause, and then there are others who will just donate to everybody. But most of the time, they're trying to donate to somebody who's going to support their cause. The candidates need this electioneering because they need the PAC money because the cost of elections are so high. So in 2022, a House election, the average House election was almost $3 million. The average Senate election was $9 million in 2023. In 2022, one election in Georgia cost $380 million. The reason it was so much was the control of the Senate was at stake. This was when it was, the whole election with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and the Senate was right down to the wire, and there had to be a second election because there was nobody there was three candidates, nobody had won, and boom, there it was, $380 million for one senator's election. All right. So what are PACs seeking when they donate money? They're seeking access to office holders, just like we talked over here about Donald Trump when he was in business. They want to be able to call up an office holder and say, hey, I just want you to hear what I need. Whether or not they do it is another thing, but that access is important. So PACs what they also want by donating money is they want to maximize their political influence. And so because of that, they'll donate to presidential candidates as well. Litigation. Okay, I just had to fix that. I just said if. So if an interest group tries to achieve some goal and get it passed through the legislature, and they don't, they may turn to the courts in hoping for a favorable ruling, which will then support the interest groups. So some of the examples of where that has happened is with environmental rights and civil rights, where the NAACP just couldn't get legislation through Congress and turned to the courts, turned to litigation to get what they wanted. And as they got what they wanted in the courts, it began to change people's ideas and values, and then they were able to get legislation passed. So litigation is an important method that interest groups use when they're not able to get things done legislatively. What also happens when an interest group wants something, particularly if there's lots of individuals in the public that agree with this or would benefit from this, who are not members of the interest group, is they will turn to the public for support. So this appeal to the public. I worked my way through college at Stater Brothers Markets, and one day my boss comes to me and he says to me, take all of the diet soda off the shelf. Doesn't matter if it's Coke or Pepsi or whatever it is, take all of the diet soda off the shelf. And I'm kind of looking at him, and it's like, this is a weird request. And he says, Congress passed some piece of legislation. That's oh, okay. And so what happened was science had found out that the artificial sweetener in sodas caused cancer in laboratory rats. And it was what was in there. And so the soda companies did not want to be liable for this. Did not want to be liable because now because of this congressional legislation, and so they were taken off the market. But then also the soda companies were losing a lot of money because the individuals who were drinking diet soda were doing it for a reason and not drinking the regular. And so the soda companies consequently are also losing money. And so there was this mass appeal on the business side and the public side, and there was an avalanche of mail that they sent in to Congress. Now, this was in the days before email. And Congress passed a moratorium on enforcing this law that has been extended 7 times, preventing the regulation from taking effect. So today, this appeal to the public comes from the social media angle. So it even works better. So it's much easier to mobilize groups of like-minded people because of the social media. It spreads like fire. And what the book says is social media is now better than a lobbyist being, it should say buying a politician lunch, steak dinner. There, fixed. You've just got this avalanche that you can turn on at any time. All right, there it is, interest group. I hope that is helpful. Especially, I hope it is helpful in answering those questions for the test. Remember, if you got any questions, just email me. I check my email a couple times a day. Hope you guys doing well. It looks like you're doing well from the grade, so nice job.